Thanks everyone for being here this afternoon. Dr. Nordvall and I are from the Department of Health and Human Performance in the School of Health Professions, and we just wanted to bring to your attention the research that we've been doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our work with our varsity triathletes. So the objectives for today are just to review the background of triathlon and really tie it in with why we are so excited about this research with NCAA, and talk about the study that we did back in the spring, and then some early results from that work, which we're hoping to go on and present nationally next year. So currently in health sciences, we have about 153 students, and a quarter of them are athletes. So we have a lot of athletes. No, please. I haven't done a breakdown by school. Yeah. So
I bet it would be probably a little higher than average.
Higher than average. Yeah. We have a lot of hands-on pre-professional tracks. So of those, 25% of our students are athletes, 5 are honors, and a handful of them are triathletes, which we'll come on to. Mm-hmm. So what's innovative about this is that we are the first school in the NCAA to have varsity triathlon. And that's for the girls, for the women's side of the house. So we have Coach Zane, who's the head coach, with his assistant Carla, and they train our triathletes year-round. Carla is a professional triathlete herself. Yeah. So a lot of the literature out there, the problem with us in terms of what we had to benchmark was there's no data out there in terms of triathlon in the NCAA because it's new. So that was the primary objective for us, is to put Marymount on the map as, the first school to have the NCAA status for triathlon, and really just to form data into the literature on this topic. So triathlon as a sport is very popular in the USA. It's governed by NCAA, the Triathlon USA Triathlon, and around 500,000 people in the States every year participate in triathlon, so it's a very popular sport. They even have mini triathlons now for children as young as 7, so it's very grassroots. Mm-hmm. So the big move was back in January 2014, where at the national NCAA National Conference, they had a vote to approve that female triathlon was added to the list of what they call emerging sports. So this means they then have a timeline to make a success in the NCAA with enough enrollment over the next 10 years. So they have to acquire 40 D1 teams and then 28 teams between D2 and D3 to prove that there's a sustainable network of athletes in the NCAA. And that then will allow them to progress to what we call championship status. So there were, at the time of us starting our research, 3 schools in the whole of the US who were declared as NCAA, and that was us, Liberty University in Virginia, and Queen's University in North Carolina. And then on the back of this ideal, USA Triathlon came up with close to $2.5 million of grant money. So 8 schools have further added to applying into getting onto the list for the emerging program. So there's currently 8 further schools who are looking to bring NCAA status to their school varsity program for triathlon. So it's an exciting time for the sport. So our study really was to, like I said at the start, gather data, human performance data on the triathletes that we have here at Marymount, so that we can publish actual data from varsity level triathletes in the literature, and to give a benchmark for other folks, because that's the one thing we have struggled with, is to find a benchmark.
Yeah, we're just basic physiological anthropometric attributes of these athletes, essentially.
Would you be comparing these to athletes in other sports, or to?
Well, that has been done. So a lot of research I shouldn't say a lot, some research has been done on comparing individualists in their particular endeavor, whether it's a cyclist versus a swimmer, et cetera, comparing them to triathletes. And some of the literature has shown that triathletes compare very well to individual specialists. Mm-hmm. But we kind of set out and wanted to look, at least in one part, in comparative data, looking at our athletes compared to the literature, other triathletes that have been published.
And the benefit to athletes who are able to declare triathlon as an NCAA sport is that it allows them to get their education whilst also being able to compete in their sport in the college setting, whereas others have to go out and find a coach who lives close to the school that they attend. So this is also a huge personal improvement for many folks to have everything in-house where the coaching staff are there with the educational setting.
So is it, looks like we have about 9 students on the team right now, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 9 last year, 9 this year. Just composition changed a little bit, yeah.
Okay, is that true at Liberty and Queens, was it?
I don't know
I don't
how
know if
many
we know
they
the numbers
have. I
there.
haven't looked into how many students they have.
I bet
They're
it's pretty small too,
programs.
but yeah.
I mean, there are huge club triathlon teams. You know, some of the West Coast schools in San Diego have very large club triathlon. So it's not that it hasn't existed as a sport. It's just never been an NCAA sport.
Right.
So.
Are there like 30 students in all of NCAA right now?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's something that certainly we should include in our data as we move forward. Yeah. So our research objective was just to gather human performance information, so fitness testing, to look at how they do in each of the 3 events of the triathlon: run, bike, and swim. So the focus for our folks here on campus are several key events across the calendar. Typically the calendar is from September through April. It varies a little bit in terms of the male focus versus female, but these are typical events. So the Olympic draft style focus of a triathlon, where drafting is allowed in the bike event, essentially, typically follows this format: 1,500 meter swim, 24-mile bike, and 10K run. And typical times for those are under 2 hours. So about 2 hours for females and about 1 hour 45 for males. So we're talking about some super fit people here, seriously fit.
Yeah, so Brian, to your question a little bit. So what will happen is the athletes from Marymount will go to any one of these competitions, which is open to the general public. So you'll have recreational athletes, you'll have highly trained, you'll have pros at these athletes. And so I asked one of our triathletes in one of my other classes who was not in the study, and she said that they accumulate points somehow. The NCAA keeps track of their placing. So the question that I'm not sure about in my mind is do you need to be a part of an actual intercollegiate varsity team, or can you be on a club still competing in one of these, and then the NCAA, since you are in a 4-year undergraduate program, technically, can you still accumulate those points towards a national standard?
I think they all go under the umbrella of USA Triathlon. I think that's where they are, sort of, all data is stored in terms of results. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always wondered how the teams compete against one another.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's just each event has its own scoring system, and then they place, collaborative scores by team, and you'll see some of that information coming up. So for the last one, for last spring's national, which was we tested our subjects right before they went off to nationals. So we tested them March, April time last year, right before they went off to nationals. So they should have been coming up on the peak of their physical performance. But we had some great results. From 700 athletes entered, we placed 23rd, 44th, and 98th for the men. So that's really some great.
Yeah, so I guess the question, Michelle, would be, are these placings based on other USATA members that are also college level, that are in
I think
university?
it's all folks who are eligible to enter for that particular event.
Right.
That's my understanding.
And they must be in university, I imagine.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think
okay.
so.
That's
Yeah.
what I think too.
Whether it's club or NCAA.
Okay.
So just to give you some empathy with our triathletes, this is what they face. The reality of a typical schedule. So this is their schedule at the time when we were trying to test them last spring. So pretty much 7 days a week, they're doing something. And it can be as high as 5 hours of physical training every day. And that can equate, depends on pace and speed, but 2,000 kilocalories expended per day just in exercise. So it's a lot of physical training. So 2 hours in the pool, an hour running, 1 hour to 2 hours on the bike every day. So again, just to give you some understanding, if you have a triathlete in your classes, they're busy folks, and this is besides their academics, and then we were asking them to come in also and be tested in our lab. So
so to prelude that, well, we did test them for swimming, we tested them running, we tested them cycling. So what we did was try and, as much as possible, work whatever testing we were doing into their normal training program. So.
And just tried to schedule all of them. I mean, there's only 10 of them, 9 or 10 tested, but just to get them all, in their schedule besides class time. So as best we could, Dr. Nordvall said we did it during their regular practice time.
As much as possible.
But it's a lot for them. So we sought IRB approval for the study, and 9 athletes initially volunteered. We lost 1 or 2 along the way in various events because of injury and dropout. So we started with 6 males and 3 females, and that's a reasonable number because that's pretty much the majority of the folks who are here and declaring it. So they came to the lab for our baseline testing, which was the quiet tests, heart rate, pulse, blood pressure, those kind of things, body composition. And then we tested them on the run and the bike in our lab, and then the swim was obviously done here at the pool. And we tried to separate them out as much as we could to give them time to recover. Although in the real life event, these would be sequential, so they're continuous with transitions, and there's no rest in between.
Yeah, so we sought to just look at their independent values, which is typically how it's presented in the literature, just looking at their both anthropometric, which you see here, as well as their physiological attributes. And there, again, are a number of ways that you might see literature present this information too. You know, you might see some present one after the other, as Dr. Walters was just explaining, or individually. So we sought out to look at these individual characteristics. So again, these are just the resting values, anthropometric, so you can see kind of the age at the top here for males and females. That would, in the literature, when we did our comparative data, equate to roughly junior elite status. All right, so one of the, again, comparative benchmarks that we compared our athletes to were junior elites in the literature. Just maybe a couple of other things to point out here. BMI stands for body mass index, right? That's typically something that you'll get when you go to a physician. They'll give you what your height to weight ratio is, and the number to be concerned with there is 30. If it goes above 30, then that's a sign of obesity. So they're far well below that. But I think very interestingly is the body fat percentage. So one way that we tested for this is to use this little device right here, which is just a skin fold caliper. All right, all it does is just, it's a little trigger, and it measures the amount of fat beneath your skin, right? And so from that, we can extrapolate to their overall percentage of body fat. And these numbers are pretty low. Males were 6%. The average male population would want to be somewhere between maybe 10, 12 to 15%. Same thing for the females. They're well below what the average population would be, which is about 20 to 25%. So they're obviously pretty fit, just without even doing any of these physiological tests.
Is that difference in resting blood pressure, is that typical for systolic?
Yeah. So as long as it's, females, I mean, as a general rule of thumb, might be a little lower, generally speaking, than males. As long as it's below 120, then that would be considered normal systolic blood pressure. So, we're shooting for 120 over 80. So they're young. They haven't,
And heart rate. Their heart rates are exceptionally low.
Heart rate's exceptionally low.
If you think about a resting heart rate, normal is 60 to 100. They're at 50, 54.
Yeah.
So very efficient.
And then, again, we looked at their ability, maximal ability during a running protocol. So we had them come to the lab. They ran on a treadmill, and they ran up to exhaustion, essentially. So during that time, we were looking at a number of different physiological indices, including their VO2 max, which is their maximum ability to take in and use oxygen. It's probably our single best indicator that we have of fitness. So there's a picture on the next slide here in a second, but I've just brought in a little method of how we would do that. So this tube would be hooked up to a metabolic analyzer. It would be attached to the athletes themselves. So, it looks almost like a pilot mask, something like that. But all the while, they're breathing into this mask, and it's collecting data on the amount of oxygen that they can bring in and utilize. So the higher that value, the better.
But that's amazing. You're taking already fit people and making them run to fatigue.
Correct.
Take hours.
Well, no. So the protocol
the run
itself.
Here. It's a pretty intense protocol set to start at a high level, so that it doesn't take.
So we have them running at 7 miles an hour, and then the grade goes up every couple of minutes. Yeah.
They start at 7 miles an hour.
So it goes up pretty quick. Right.
Because of that, because it would take hours if you did a traditional ramp protocol.
Correct.
So the female average time was 10 minutes.
Correct.
And the male's 15 minutes.
Right. It's true.
How do you tire out a Duracell bunny.
So some other data, we looked at their heart rate, so we have average heart rate during the test. We have their maximal heart rates, which is pretty high, actually. It's actually in the ballpark of what you would think would be normal for these athletes. So the simplest way to do this is if you take your age and subtract that from 220, that's roughly going to be your maximal heart rate.
So 200 would be their expected heart rate max.
Right.
So,
Right. So it's pretty close.
But they're running to max heart rate is what you should take from that.
Do you know how these stats compare to other types of athletes? Like, is there, do you compare to, like, I don't know what the cross-country athletes, I don't know if that'd be the right comparison, or...
A lot of these students are also on the cross-country team.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
yeah.
So they dual sport.
Are there any stats for national...
Well, I would imagine that on the run or for any of the individual disciplines, you would probably find that if you have standalone athletes, they would probably score higher than the triathletes themselves, since the triathletes are having to spread their training over 3 disciplines instead of focusing just on one in particular. But again, at the very elite level, they do compare very well to individualists in particular sports. Right.
Are any of these stats things that they're trying to target?
So that's a good question. So one of the things that we'd like to do with the study is continue and redo the assessment at various points in the year to see how training influences, again, perhaps lactate response. So if this number is a little bit lower during exercise, then that's a better indicator of fitness. They're able to use their aerobics capacity a little better than they would. So yeah, that's a good question. So that we had originally built that into the proposal to continue the study over a period of time. Yeah.
And we've also gained some more equipment in the meantime from another grant to look at hematological markers. So that's ongoing right now.
Yeah. And just, could you back?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thanks. And just real quick, what we did also with each one of these disciplines is we just did some simple gender comparisons, right? And so just comparing males to females on their values. I mean, it's not anything truly groundbreaking here. You might assume it would be the case. But there are some interesting things over time. I think one of the interesting factors was lactate, which again is sort of a metabolic byproduct that the muscle produces. Right? In males, in this case, it's lower than females. And then if we go to the next slide, males, it's higher than females for the bike. Why that is, don't know. So, yeah, don't know exactly why that might be.
Body weight supported versus non-supported, we
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
But that's certainly something we should look into if others have seen it.
Yeah, and it could be just the difference in the makeup of the musculature in females, maybe some more slow twitch muscle fibers, which is more aerobic in nature, so we would have to follow up on that one. So here's one of our athletes on the bike test. All right, so what you can't quite see here off this way would be a treadmill, so everything was taking place in the same location. Here's that metabolic analyzer, so this mask that would be hooked up to that metabolic analyzer. They were able to cycle on their own bicycles, so we can bring them in. We just need to make a slight little modification because one of the additional physiological indicators on a bike that is really important to get in the literature is the amount of power that they're able to produce on the cycloergometer. So I used to race bicycles myself, and I had one of these laying around because the coach of the triathlon team, we were going to use one of his, but that thing broke down. So I donated mine to the cause. Unfortunately, this was able to just clip into the back of everybody's bike and give us power. So there's a power meter in the hub right here that just, again, sends information to a computer, and it tells you how much power they're producing, which is a pretty critical indicator here.
You know what's surprising about that photograph? I had in my mind when you started talking that these would be almost anorexic people.
Okay.
And that person's not looking.
No, he's very lean,
very
but he's very
lean, but
musculature.
muscular,
He's
yeah.
got a good degree of musculature. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, these aren't. I think when you think of triathlon, the first thing that maybe comes to a lot of people's mind is Hawaiian Ironman triathlon, these ultra endurance, and they're not doing that. They're more sort of sprint, which would require a little more, say, muscle mass to really be effective, as opposed to the long endurance, 100-mile bike, where they're a lot leaner. They're a lot thinner. Yeah. It would probably be even lower than that.
Less than 18.5 is underweight.
Yeah. So just some, again, we ran some male-female comparisons here on the bike. Some other things to point out. Generally, the bike VO2 max. Again, their maximal mobility is lower on a bike compared to the run, just because simply the run you use more muscle mass, so there's more involvement here with oxygen coming in to the system and so on. But I think the coolest finding on this page is this on the bottom. So when we look at the amount of power that these athletes are able to produce during the exercise, well, obviously you would assume, okay, males can produce more, which is exactly what we're looking at here, right? 332 versus 283. But when you adjust it for every 1 kilogram of body weight, right? So power to weight ratio, no difference between males and females. It's pretty cool. And it's pretty
So
cool.
it's really good. I mean, that just shows that the females are as powerful as the males.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, girl power.
Female power, absolutely. Sorry, Michelle, I could have done that. And then the last mode of activity we did was to look at a swim. And so we didn't really, there is no sort of standard way of approaching how to determine the fitness of a triathlete using a swim test in the literature. So the only thing we really had to go by was Australia publishes a performance standards for their junior elite national selection process. So we used that, which was a 1 kilometer swim time. And so we had our athletes go to the pool, we had them do a 1 kilometer swim, and then we also collected heart rate and breath per lap data. Obviously, we couldn't test their VO2 in the water. It's not waterproof, so we couldn't quite do that. But again, you can see there were some gender differences between the two. To be determined.
We haven't run it yet.
Yeah,
we
gotta
get that.
Yeah, we gotta
We
get
have
that
it,
done.
but we haven't run the stats.
Yeah.
With this, are you like your number of athletes is relatively low? Are you doing multiple trials for each athlete?
Well, again, that's what we hope to do, right? So we hope to, if we could, get these same athletes again.
Multiple men.
Look at how their training, is to a certain point where they are in a particular competitive season, and then do the same thing again.
Okay.
Yeah, to see if it has changed.
Like, are all these numbers based on like just one data point for each athlete?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. So
correct.
one event,
one
group
kilometer swim
average
time for each
score.
athlete mean together. So that's a good question. So if we go, how do I go back using a touch screen?
Which one do you want to go to?
The run. So for example, if we look at the males here, 66 would be the average VO2 on the run. I mean, we had some as low as, the upper 50s, but we had one that was roughly 75, which would have been Olympic level, actually.
Oh, wow.
So one of our athletes compared well to Olympic athletes. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah.
I am so impressed. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
Yeah, they're really
They're
pretty
really
impressive.
Fit.
Yeah. So then the last part to our data analysis was to just simply compare the athletes from Marymount to existing data published in the literature. And so there really isn't a whole lot. We found one great study and a couple of other independent studies that sort of compiled all the literature to date. And so from that, we came up with 3 groups that we can compare our individual athletes to. And those groups were highly trained. So these are generally adults, of any age competing in triathlon, young elites. So these would be comparable aged athletes to our population. And then the third one here is just recreational of any age. So when we ran the data, we just did simple group comparisons, male and females, to highly trained. Certainly we saw that our athletes were a little lower than their comparative highly trained counterparts. But again, they're still maturing, so that is something. And again, there are some outliers to that as well, where we had that one individual score 75, which is extremely high. We compare actually very well to this. Young elites, same thing here. Our athletes were a little bit lower than the young elites published in the data. And these young elites are basically competing at a national level. So they're very fit, extreme, French national teams, things, something like that. But we were higher than recreational athletes across the board, which is also pretty impressive. So I think, part of the recruiting process and part of the gaining recognition for triathlon as a sport will only see this improve a little bit. I think the other interesting thing to point out here, too, is that very little exists on females. So certainly this is adding to the literature in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Where there exists, there is
Yeah,
no
hopefully
data
this will provide a
existing in that.
benchmark for other folks who are looking for
Exactly,
this.
exactly.
So do you think the young elites are those that have their own personal coaches and that's
Yeah, or
what
on,
they do?
yeah,
Or
or
could
on,
be on
yeah, Yeah, developmental teams, exactly. So sort of like, we have this, just America does not publish this data. So when we, try and run some comparative data, and the other thing that we need to do here is run the comparative data to the Australian performance centers, which they publish, which we haven't done yet, but we will do. But I imagine we're going to be a little bit lower in terms of our 1 kilometer swim time than the benchmark for that. But USA has that, but they just don't simply publish it. So for whatever reason, they keep it sort of undercover. Yeah.
But this has only been an Olympic sport since 2000 as well, so it's,
Yeah,
it's
I think so.
relatively
Since it
new
is proprietary, I think they're wanting to try and,
keeping it under wraps.
Yeah, exactly. 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 Well, I think we're pretty much out of time, but
So main conclusions we've really covered most. It was a small sample size, but it is what it is for us. We can't magic up a triathlete. But hopefully the program will grow. Like we said, there are around 10 folks now enrolled in the program, and that's hopefully going to grow as the reputation of the program improves. But we saw some, good significant differences across the sexes. We would expect that in part. But really the relative power was one of the strongest findings for us, that when we relativized by body mass, and the females are equally as powerful as the guys in the bike event. So that's a really nice outcome.
cool.
And just hopefully this adds something to the literature. So we're working on the abstract this week for this to go into the American College of Sports Medicine's national conference, which will be in Boston next late May, early June. So hopefully that's accepted. It puts us again on the map in terms of having some varsity data and getting this information out.
Sure. Cool. Cool. It's good stuff.
So if you have a triathlete in your class now, maybe you'll be a little bit more understanding of
So
what
it's cool
they
the
go
wisdom
through.
of Dr. Shank putting this together for us. I think.
Do you guys keep track of like what year the students are, like the freshmen? Right now it'd all be freshmen, sophomores, right, at this point?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we've got one who's a junior right now.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back and look at that data,
we
but since
could
it's only, I think the vast majority of them were freshmen when they came on the team because it was the first year, and so they were recruited to come to Marymount because of the triathlon team. So
Right.
yeah.
Some may
so
already
they're
have
pretty
been here
young.
for cross country as well.
Maybe age would be the right metric, but it'd be interesting if you're a
Freshman class. Yeah.
if you're repeating this over
Right.
years.
Right.
What changes there are based
Sure.
on age,
Sure.
class level.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sure.
Please. We were 5 minutes
Yeah, you're right.
over the
You're right.
other
That would be.
session, so.
Yeah, and we had, one was a little non-traditional student, but by and large they were very traditional. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.